Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America on the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network. Great to have you with us on the program today. As mentioned, we'll be talking about a very important book, one we need to read to help us make sense of the world events. The book is called The Dawn of Islamic Literalism, Rise of the Crescent Moon. The author, Joseph Butta Jr., is with us on the program today, an analyst, an author, instructor. Joe, welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us.
Rick, it's wonderful to be with you and your audience also.
So much ground to cover during the course of the program today because this is so important to us, and you do such an excellent job in the book of really sort of breaking down and giving us a better understanding what we're dealing with in the world. And I want to start with your background. I understand this goes back to like 1979 at Khomeini and then in the situation in Iran.
Oh, that's correct. When the whole Iranian hostage situation broke down, I really didn't understand it, nor did a lot of Americans, of how people from one part of the world could do this and really give justification for it, and especially when they came in with whole new terms. What's an ayatollah? What are imams? So this was all new to us because we were just coming out of that whole Soviet. So you understood the Russians and communism, but all of a sudden Iran, what does all this mean? So that sort of piqued my curiosity. And of course, as we went through the 80s and we got into terrorism and all this, and you heard continually the term Islamic associated with these sort of things, and I thought to myself, well, this doesn't make sense. How can a religion, or people claim that their religion is associated with these kind of acts? So I started to go into school more and doing my own research and sort of discover some things which I thought were worth sharing with folks. And little by little, I started putting together the framework for this book.
You can find out information. The book's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all around the country. Website information is joebutta, BUTTA.wordpress.com. The book is The Dawn of Islamic Literalism, Rise of the Crescent Moon. Wanted to start by talking about some of the terms that we'll be using during the course of the interview that we hear a lot in the news. Sometimes we think they're interchangeable, sometimes not. We don't fully understand. And let's start with the basic. We're talking about Islamic literalism. What is it with Islam? Sort of define what we're dealing with here.
Well, what we have is, in Islam, from the Judeo-Christian point of view, Christians understand Old Testament, New Testament as the core texts of faith. Jewish people understand it as the Tanakh, which is the Old Testament, and the Talmud, given the interpretation. In Islam, you have the core book, which are Allah's words coming through in the Quran. So the Quran is Allah's will. Muslims know Allah's will through the Quran. But the authoritative sources are not limited in Islam to the Quran. There are also other works that encompass what the Muslims call the Sunnah of the Prophet. And these include the Sirah, which is Muhammad's biography, the Hadiths that give his all sense of his traditions and his thoughts and sayings on certain matters, and also the history known as the Tariq, which is about 38 volumes of material. So this altogether, when capsulized together, not only gives Allah's will, but it gives the basis for Sharia, which is Islamic law.
Well, it was interesting as I'm reading the book, The Dawn of Islamic Literalism, I'm thinking most of this comes from the Quran. You just mentioned there are a number of books that actually goes into the process here.
Well, that's correct. The Quran itself, for a Westerner, and I wrote this for Westerners, Westerners read the Quran, it's very hard to grasp what's going on, because when the Quran was compiled, it wasn't compiled with any sense of chronology. For instance, chapter 2, known as Surah 2 in the Quran, starts in the year 623, and Muhammad's revelation started in the year 610. So you're not getting much of a story. It's not until you incorporate the Sirah and the Hadith and the Tariq, all these traditions of Muhammad, then you know when the Quran, in fact, was revealed. So chronologically, the first chapter of the Quran that was revealed was actually chapter 96. So that's how I start my book. My book starts with chapter 96, which chronologically was the first revealed.
And you mentioned written for Westerners. You do the sort of the Western interpretation at the end, and you have a chance to sort of tie this together in words that we understand and puts it into layman perspective. When we're talking about Muslims, Islamist, are those terms interchangeable?
Well, no. Muslims generally probably read the Quran probably as about as often as an average Christian would read the Bible. So it gets, Muslim or Islam becomes, well, this is part of my group. I belong to this group. So in the West, we shouldn't assume that everyone will read their faces in the Quran all the time. But folks that tend to want to be more religious are going to get involved even more. Those who believe not only in the religious application but the political application of Islam, of which Islam, unlike Judaism and Christianity, is every bit as political as it is religious. So those who start believing in the political application of Islam as applied by Muhammad 1,400 years ago, well, then they want to bring the events of the 6th and 7th century into the present day because they believe eventually the world is for Allah and for His Prophet. So in terms of bringing it, yes, they want people to become Muslims, but also in the implementation of Islamic law, they're not so concerned about our will in terms of do we want it. To them, it must be imposed.
You're listening to This Week in America. Our guest on the program is Joseph Butta, B-U-T-T-A, author of the book, The Dawn of Islamic Literalism, Rise of the Crescent Moon. The website for information is joebutta.wordpress.com. Of course, you can link onto our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and get that information as well. The book available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all around the country. Let's talk now specifically about Islamic literalism. As I understand it, reading the book, you have Islamic literalism as well as fundamentalism, and there's a drastic difference between the two.
Yes, it's a key difference because all religions have their fundamentalists. It means they believe in the core text, the core interpretation of their text. Literalism differs from fundamentalism because an Islamic fundamentalist reads those texts and believes it's true, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to act on them, especially politically. But an Islamic literalist believes it's true and believes that it is really the duty of every Muslim to, in fact, act on it. So when they see Muhammad's actions, Muhammad being to them the perfect person that ever lived, they seek to mirror his actions, and many of his actions were violent when you go back 1,400 years ago. The problem is when you try to live that out in the current day, well, then you have really the inception of what we consider modern-day terrorism.
This Week in America, the website joebutta.wordpress.com for the book, The Dawn of Islamic Literalism. How many are we talking about worldwide that practice Islamic literalism? How big a threat is this?
Well, first of all, Muslims are total now about 1.6 billion. From the sources that I've read, those who really believe in the fundamental look at Islam and its literal interpretation, we're looking anywhere from 10 to 20%. So basically the population of the United States.
Amazing. I mean, that's huge.
That doesn't mean people who are going to be out on the battlefield.
Right.
But that means people who will supply them with weapons, supply them with shelter, spread the ideology, that entire infrastructure that leads to those who are the point of the spear, those who are actually out on the battlefield. And in doing that, not all of them believe that the way that Islam shall conquer is through battle. Others believe in a much stealthier approach, which is basically the Muslim Brotherhood model for spreading Islam.
So many people think when they read of these terrorist activities, they read of their beliefs, put them in the category of being crazy. And in reading the book, The Dawn of Islamic Literalism, I get the mistake. We really, really can't do that. These people are not crazy.
No, not at all. They believe that they're being pious Muslims. They've been taught from inception that, Allah is supreme, that of everyone who ever lived, the seal of all the prophets, that considers all the ones that came out of the Bible up today is Muhammad. Muhammad is the perfect example. So to really understand what's going on in the world, there really needs to be a study of Muhammad and his behaviors and actions, because as we study Muhammad, we really get to learn and really put into context what's happening today.
How does the government adequately handle this problem?
I think they're doing a pretty bad job of it. I think how the government handles it in terms of, especially education, most of the time they go to other people, other Muslims, and just ask them to do it, because often when non-Muslims talk about this, Muslims may be offended by or may not want that interpretation to come out. So unfortunately, I think often government just sees cedes the field to Muslims to give this interpretation. How I personally feel, what I've learned, there's only one person in the world that's qualified to talk about what Islam really is, and it's Muhammad. He's the only one, not individual Muslims, not Westerners. It's Muhammad, and that's what I've done through my book. I've made Muhammad known because Muhammad is the creator of Islam. He alone defines what Islam truly is.
And as you read, Muhammad participated in 38 raids, sent Islamic forces into 47 battles, ordered assassinations of 36 men and women, had 59 slaves, married 22 times. Fascinating to read about Muhammad in that way.
Well, yes, it is, and it's difficult because, again, we're dealing with 1,400 years in the past, what was going on in Arabia, and to put it in context, you have to understand what kind of society that he came out of and what was going on at the time. But it was obvious. I mean, he had enemies, and he sought through the guidance of his God to employ these different dictates to conquer them. And sometimes it was done by deception. Other times, if it was his will, that people would just understand that he's the prophet and fall in line. But whoever he thought that was a threat, he moved against them, and ultimately he was successful.
The book is The Dawn of Islamic Literalism, literally a one-stop introduction for people who want to know more about Islamic literalism and the threat to the world. The Dawn of Islamic Literalism, Rise of the Crescent Moon. Joseph Butta, our guest on the program, author of the book. His website is joebutta, butta.wordpress.com. Information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. How do we handle the threat? When we read the book, when we listen to you talking, when it's all over with, how do we handle this situation?
The biggest vulnerability that we have in the West is absolutely our ignorance. And Islamists know this. So they believe when they come and say, well, I come from this background, they basically tell us what we want to hear because we don't know any different. Of course, to understand this material, it takes some work to really delve into it so we can make up our own minds. So our greatest vulnerability is us not knowing. Once we know the material that's in the book that I've put together, then we can't be deceived anymore. And then we can speak to their talking points, and they'll know, in fact, that we know what we're talking about. So it eliminates the whole sense of deception, and it helps us to put the proper framework in this conflict that we see in the world today, because we can speak with authority and because we will really know. So Americans have to get to the point, stop relying on what politicians say, stop relying on what other Islamists say. We need to take the time to read these kind of works and understand it, to protect ourselves and to make better decisions in the future.
Once we have that knowledge, once we have that understanding, what do we do with that? I'm getting the impression that the literalists are very rigid in their beliefs. It's sort of my way or you're doomed.
Well, that's absolutely correct. And the biggest thing that this book, it will make it more easy for us to protect ourselves. We're going to be living with this for the rest of our lives. There's not going to be any sense of we're all going to sit down at a Versailles kind of conference,
right,
or we're all going to get together later. Now, this is a much different kind of conflict because it's not they all wear the same uniform and we wear a different uniform. This is an ideological fight. It's a fight in the media. It's going to be a kinetic fight. It's a religious fight. And I know we stay away from that because, see, our government can only handle problems that are political in nature, but this has a religious threat to it. So it has to have religious responses to the religious threat, and it's there also. So Islam, as we understand it, we come to understand it, it's not just religious. It's every bit political as it is religious. It needs two different kinds of solutions.
We talked about Islamic literalism and fundamentalist. Is there tension between the two? Are they fighting within themselves?
No, not really, because what's happening is the conflict in Islam comes when you separate Sunni from Shia. A Shiite can be a literalist, like Khomeini was, and like Al Qaeda on the other side, they're also literalists. So literalists are Hezbollah, literalists are Al Qaeda, but they're separated through their religious split between Sunni and. In this sense, you can have literalists who are actually opposed to each other. That's what we have now in Syria. When you look at what's going on from Lebanon through Syria, through Iraq, all the way to Iran, we have basically the makings of a regional Sunni Shia civil war, and in that you have literalists on both sides going after one another. So literalists all deals with the interpretation, but within Islam, there's a strict divide between Sunni, which deals with the Sunnah, the traditions of the Prophet, and the Shia, who are partisans of Ali, meaning that what they believe is in the implementation of someone from the Prophet's bloodline to head the Islamic community.
Read a headline not that long ago that said young people in Islamic nations shaping the debate. Will things change as younger people become more powerful?
As modernity clashes with Islam, the younger ones, what we can hope for in the West is that younger ones will try to grasp on only the religious application of Islam, and also be more tolerant to the implementation of what the beliefs of Jews, the beliefs of Christians, the beliefs of Hindus and others, so that they don't feel like that they have to oppress people who believe differently from them, and a less literal interpretation of the Islamic text. But what we see going on in the world today is actually Muslims generally look around the world and say everything has failed them, so their only salvation will be Islam itself and the Islam of the Prophet. So this is why this has really gone to the forefront, because every other system, every other thing that they've tried within Islamic society seems to be failing them. So now many are turning towards this more literal interpretation, because they're also, in doing that, they're introduced into the eventual eschatology of Islam, which promises that in the future, Allah's religion will reign supreme throughout the world.
Joseph Butta, our guest on This Week in America. The book is called The Dawn of Islamic Literalism, Rise of the Crescent Moon. His website is joebutta, butta.wordpress.com. The book's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all across the country, and, of course, information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. A couple minutes left in the program. Another headline, and I just saw this last night as I was looking at the internet before I went to bed, a story that said Saudi Arabia passes kingdom's first domestic abuse law. Is that encouraging news?
Well, yes, it is, but let's be clear. They're not bringing it about because of a new interpretation of the Islamic text. Surah 4, the fourth chapter of the Quran, says pointedly that husbands can beat wives who aren't behaving correctly. So this has really gotten out of hand in the Islamic world, where husbands would have free reign because the woman is my property, not an equal to me, and I have to treat her a certain way. Matter of fact, in the traditions of the Prophet, it even says in the Prophet, if a woman, for instance, in terms of amorous things, she's not in the mood for her husband, it says the angels will curse her until morning because she doesn't want to give in to the desires of her husband. So Muslim women have been dealing with this from the beginning. Muhammad even said, and you find this in my book also, is that the majority of the inhabitants of hell are women. So women have got it kind of tough when you're dealing with the words of the Prophet and Allah's decrees within in the Quran. So I would say this is more of international pressure than anything else, trying to bring a change in Saudi Arabia. But it also could be, hey, we just want the Saudi leadership, and the Wahhabis could also say, well, let's just put this out to placate the non-Muslims, but we're not going to change anything within the kingdom.
You say in the book, Allah revealed through Muhammad part of the mission to initiate revolution. In this revolution, those who oppose Islam in this life and those who die in unbelief will be punished, putting fear into the hearts of non-believers. I guess that sort of summarizes everything we're talking about for the literalist. That's what their life is devoted to.
Well, yes, it does. And the reason being is that the whole term infidel, as kufr, as used in the Quran, never is the non-believer promised the delights of the afterlife. It's always related to hell. So what happens is the non-Muslim is not relegated to any sense of equality with the Muslim. It's only relegated to something beneath. And because all non-Muslims are to be damned, the Islamic literalist doesn't feel like they have to treat us with any sense of respect. So therefore they can lie to us, they can kill you, they can do all these different things because our fate's already determined. And unlike last-second conversions, Islam is really based in terms of salvation on a point system, more good deeds versus more bad deeds. So even if you would come to Islam later in your life, you may have developed so many negative points before you accepted Islam that it still won't be enough to save you.
Besides the book, The Dawn of Islamic Literalism, Rise of the Crescent Moon, Joe's available for courses, available for presentations, and I just have a few minutes left. But I want to talk about the topic, and one of the presentations is Threat Analysis, Stealth, and Violent Jihad. How concerned are you about the immediate future for the United States and this ongoing battle?
Well, very, because if we take a look at what's going on in Europe, the Europeans are finally starting to get a grasp that the future of Europe is in peril. Here in the United States, because we've given ourselves off to so much political correctness, often to really be able to address these things, if you address and you have a different point of view, quite often you're called a racist or you're called narrow-minded or hateful, and it stymies any kind of discussion. The Islamists know that really militarily they can't beat us. So the way then to do it is get within the societies and work towards becoming more friendly, give a friendly face, and ultimately work towards changing laws that ultimately what they want to do is say that, well, if you give any criticism of Islam at all, it's hateful. So therefore we want to consider it a hate crime. So the Islamists, really the Muslim Brotherhood sense of spreading stealth jihad, is to ultimately get any criticism of Islam that's not, any kind of opinion of Islam that's not approved by them, considered hateful, so that whole thing can be stymied, and then more easily they could implement the Sharia throughout the land.
Well, and we hear about Sharia. We hear about it often, that we need to be aware of this. It's creeping into U.S. society. Is that overstated?
No, I don't believe it is, because there's a tremendous jihadist machine that's behind that. You have millions of Muslims who are working towards that end, because like Christianity, Islam is a proselytizing faith. So, of course, there's Christian missionaries everywhere. Well, Muslims are also going to practice what they call the dawah, the call. So it's their mission to bring more people into it. So if you can't convert the people into it, then what you can do is influence the laws how they are, so that it becomes actually a dictate of the state to impose these laws, and therefore you force even the non-Muslims to conformity.
Been a fascinating discussion. Our guest on the program has been Joseph Butta Jr., author of the book, The Dawn of Islamic Literalism, Rise of the Crescent Moon. His website is joebutta, butta.wordpress.com. You can link on and get information, go directly to Joe's website by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Book available. It's a must-read at Amazon, available at barnesandnoble.com, anywhere in the country. Of course, you can get that at the website as well. Working, I understand, on another book, so we'd love to have you back, and we'll continue the discussion.
Now, Rick, I really enjoyed it. You call me anytime you like.
Okay, Joe, thank you very much. And you're listening to This Week in America on the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network.